I never thought my wedding day would end with me hiding in a bathroom stall, mascara streaming down my face while everyone laughed. Derek, my fiancé of 3 years, the man I'd built my future around, humiliated me at the altar. He stood there, handsome in his tuxedo, and announced to our 200 guests that he couldn't marry me because he was in love with my best friend Vanessa. They'd been sleeping together for a year. The worst part wasn't his betrayal or even Vanessa's smug smile as she stepped forward to take his hand. It was the laughter. His friends, his family, even some of mine, laughing at my pain like it was the funniest joke. They all knew. Everyone knew except me. I ran away that day, broken and lost. But what they don't realize is that I'm coming back. And when I return, no one will be laughing anymore. I stared at my reflection in the mirror, barely recognizing the woman in the white dress staring back at me. Today was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. After 3 years with Derek, we were finally getting married. My hands trembled slightly as I adjusted my veil one last time. "You look beautiful, Amara," my mother said from behind me, her voice tinged with something I couldn't quite place. Pride? Worry? I smiled at her through the mirror, pushing away the nagging feeling that something was off. The last few months had been a whirlwind of planning and stress. Derek had been distant, working late hours at his tech startup, leaving most of the wedding arrangements to me and Vanessa, my best friend since college and maid of honor. I told myself it was normal pre-wedding jitters when he missed our cake, tasting, or when he seemed distracted during our dance lessons. 10 minutes until showtime, the wedding coordinator announced, poking her head into the bridal suite. My stomach tightened with a mix of excitement and anxiety. "I need a moment alone," I told my mother and the bridesmaids, just to collect my thoughts. They filed out, leaving me in the quiet room surrounded by flowers and half-empty champagne glasses. I closed my eyes and took a deep breath, trying to calm my racing heart. That's when I heard it. Laughter. Muffled voices coming from the room next door, where Derek was supposed to be getting ready with his groomsmen. I recognized his laugh immediately. It was the one that used to make my heart soar, the deep rumble that appeared when he was truly amused. Then I heard another voice. Female. Familiar. Curiosity pulled me toward the connecting door between our suites. It was slightly ajar, enough for me to peer through without being noticed. What I saw shattered everything in an instant. Derek, still only half-dressed in his wedding pants and undershirt, had Vanessa pressed against the wall. Her bridesmaid dress was bunched up around her waist, his hands tangled in her hair as they kissed passionately. They were so engrossed in each other they didn't notice me watching. "We can't keep doing this," Vanessa whispered, though she made no move to push him away. "Not today of all days." "I know," Derek replied, pressing his forehead against hers. "But after today we won't have to hide anymore, I promise." I stepped back from the door, my hand pressed against my mouth to stop any sound from escaping. The room spun around me. 3 years. 3 years of loving him, supporting his dreams, planning our future together. And all this time, he'd been with her, my best friend, the person I'd trusted most after him. I should have stormed in there. I should have screamed and raged and called off the wedding. That's what any rational person would have done. But shock does strange things to a person. Instead, I smoothed down my dress, fixed my makeup with mechanical precision, and decided to proceed. I needed to understand. I needed answers. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe I hadn't seen what I thought I saw. The denial was a thin shield, but it was all I had as I prepared to walk down the aisle. My father took my arm outside the chapel doors, giving me an encouraging smile. "Ready, sweetheart? You look like you've seen a ghost." "I'm fine," I lied, my voice distant even to my own ears. "Just nervous?" The music began, and the doors opened to reveal a chapel filled with smiling faces. At the altar stood Derek, handsome in his black tuxedo, watching me with an expression I couldn't read. Beside him, his best man grinned widely. On the other side stood my bridesmaids, Vanessa front and center, her face a perfect mask of happiness, for her best friend. With each step down the aisle, memories flashed through my mind. Our first date at the campus coffee shop, the weekend trips to the beach, the night he proposed under the stars at the lake where we first said I love you. Had it all been a lie? Every moment tainted by his betrayal? I reached the altar in a daze. Derek took my hands in his, and they felt like a stranger's. The officiant began speaking, but the words washed over me without meaning. I was still hoping, desperately, that I'd misunderstood what I'd seen. Then came the vows. Derek cleared his throat, looking into my eyes with what I now recognized as guilt, not love. Amara, he began, his voice steady at first. I promise to speak from my heart today. Something in his tone made the chapel go silent. This wasn't the voice of a man professing his love. I can't do this, he continued, dropping my hands. I can't go through with this farce. Murmurs rippled through the guests. My heart pounded so hard I was sure everyone could hear it. The truth is, Derek announced, loud enough for everyone to hear, I'm in love with someone else. I have been for a long time. He turned toward Vanessa, who stepped forward without hesitation to take his hand. My supposed best friend didn't even have the decency to look ashamed. Vanessa and I have been together for the past year, Derek continued, as if he was announcing a business merger instead of destroying my life in front of everyone we knew. We never meant for it to happen, but we can't deny our feelings anymore. The chapel erupted in gasps and whispers. I stood frozen, humiliation burning through me like acid. This was worse than what I'd witnessed through the door. This was public. Execution of everything I'd believed in. At least you found out before signing the papers, Derek's best man called out, breaking the tension with the worst possible joke. And then came the sound that would haunt my nightmares. Laughter. It started with a few nervous chuckles, then spread. Derek's college friends, his cousins, even some of my distant relatives who never thought I was good enough for him. They laughed. At my pain, at my complete humiliation. I looked at my parents, hoping for support, for someone to stand up and defend me. My father looked mortified but remained seated. My mother covered her face with her hands. The laughing grew louder in my ears, drowning out everything else. I backed away from the altar, my expensive dress suddenly feeling like a costume in a cruel play, where I was the only one who didn't know the plot. With the last shred of dignity I could muster, I turned and walked back down the aisle alone. No running, no tears yet, though they burned behind my eyes. With each step, with each barely concealed smile or outright laugh from the guests, something inside me withered and died. I made it to the church doors before I heard Derek call after me, not an apology, but an irritation. Amara, don't make this more dramatic than it needs to be. Those words gave me the strength to push through the doors and keep walking, even as the tears finally spilled over. I had loved him completely. I had trusted her implicitly. And in return, they humiliated me at what should have been the happiest moment of my life. I had no idea then that this moment, this crushing public betrayal, would eventually become the foundation upon which I would rebuild myself. All I knew as I fled my own wedding was that nothing would ever be the same again. I don't remember much about the hours after I fled the church. Someone, my cousin Maya, I think, drove me back to my apartment. I sat in the passenger seat, still wearing my wedding dress, staring blankly at the road ahead. She tried to comfort me, but her words barely registered. All I could hear was the laughter echoing in my head. My apartment felt strange when I returned, filled with boxes half-packed for the move to the new house Derek and I had bought together. Wedding gifts piled in corners, still wrapped. Photos of us everywhere. I tore off my dress, leaving it in a heap on the floor and curled up in bed, fully expecting to cry until I had nothing left. But the tears didn't come. Instead, a cold numbness spread through me. I lay there staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of our relationship, searching for signs I'd missed. The next morning, my phone was flooded with messages. Some expressing sympathy, others morbid curiosity disguised as concern. I ignored them all and stayed in bed for 3 days straight, barely eating, barely sleeping. On the fourth day, I forced myself to shower and check my email. That's when I discovered they'd used my wedding deposits to fund their own ceremony. An email from my wedding photographer included photos he'd taken as requested by the groom at the courthouse 2 days after what should have been our wedding. There they were, Derek and Vanessa, beaming at the camera. She wore a simple white dress. He wore the suit I'd helped him pick out for our honeymoon. I vomited in the bathroom sink, my body rejecting this new reality. Social media became a torture chamber. Within a week, their profiles were filled with honeymoon photos from the trip Derek and I had planned together. Mutual friends commented with heart emojis and congratulations. Someone tagged me in a photo where Derek was feeding Vanessa. Cake captioned, "Sometimes the practice wife helps you find your forever one." It got 17 likes before I saw it. I deleted all my accounts that day, but the damage was already spreading. Derek had apparently been telling people I'd been controlling and career-obsessed, painting himself as the victim, who'd found true love against the odds. Vanessa claimed she'd never meant to hurt me, but couldn't fight what was meant to be. Their narrative was so well-crafted, so believable to those who wanted to believe it. Worse, I learned they'd been hiding in plain sight for months. The late nights at his startup? He'd been with her. The weekends she couldn't meet for coffee because of family commitments? With him. They'd been laughing behind my back while I planned our wedding, while I confided in her about my hopes for my marriage. My other friends began to fade away. Some admitted they'd suspected but hadn't wanted to hurt me. Others took Derek and Vanessa's side entirely. They're really in love, Amara. Sometimes these things happen. As if that justified the betrayal, the humiliation, the lies. The final blow came when my boss called. My performance had been slipping for weeks before the wedding, and the dramatic outcome had become office gossip. They were concerned about my ability to focus, and suggested I take some time. The thinly veiled firing left me without income just when I needed it most. I couldn't afford the apartment on my own. Derek and I had pooled our savings for the house down payment, money I couldn't access while our assets were tied up in what promised to be a messy separation. The lease was ending in 2 weeks, and I had nowhere to go except back to my parents' house in the suburbs. My father helped me move my things in silence. My mother kept her comments to pointed sighs and barely concealed "I told you so" glances. They'd never fully approved of Derek, but rather than finding solidarity in being right, they seemed to blame me for not seeing what they had. "He always seemed too smooth," my mother finally said over dinner my first night back. "But you were so stubborn about him. You could have warned me more clearly," I mumbled, pushing food around my plate. "Would you have listened?" My father raised an eyebrow. "You were determined to marry him. Maybe next time you'll choose someone more reliable." Their house felt like a prison. My childhood bedroom, now converted to a guest room with no trace of my former self, became my refuge and my cell. I applied for jobs half-heartedly, facing rejection after rejection in a tight market. Each day blended into the next. The lowest point came 6 weeks after the wedding. I received an envelope containing divorce papers and a note from Derek's lawyer. He wanted to expedite the process so he and Vanessa could move forward with their lives. As if I was just an inconvenient chapter they needed to close. That night, I stood in my parents' bathroom, staring at the bottle of sleeping pills my mother kept in the medicine cabinet. The thought formed with terrifying clarity. I could just not exist anymore. I could escape the pain, the humiliation, the pitying glances, the whispers that followed me around our small town. I could disappear and it would be over. I swallowed the pills one by one, chasing them with tap water. Then I lay down on the cold tile floor and waited for peace. I don't know if I really wanted to die or if I just wanted everything to stop. For a while. Either way, I didn't expect my mother to find me. I woke up in the hospital, tubes in my arms, the harsh fluorescent lights burning my eyes. My mother sat beside the bed, face drawn and pale. For the first time since the wedding, she looked at me without judgment. "Why?" she asked simply. I turned away, unable to explain how completely I'd lost myself. How the person I thought I was had been erased by Derek's betrayal and replaced with someone I didn't recognize or want to be. How the laughter in that church had killed something essential inside me. The hospital kept me for 3 days on suicide watch. I was assigned to a psychiatrist who prescribed antidepressants and recommended intensive therapy. My parents watched me like hawks when I returned home, removing anything I might use to hurt myself, walking on eggshells around me as if I might shatter at any moment. Maybe I would have. Maybe I would have tried again, or just faded away into a half-life of depression and regret. But sometimes the universe throws you a lifeline when you least expect it and most need it. Mine came in the form of Dr. Chen, the no-nonsense therapist I was assigned through the hospital's outpatient program. At our first session, she looked at me with clear, assessing eyes and said words that somehow cut through the fog I'd been living in. "They took your wedding day from you," she said bluntly. "Are you going to let them take your life too?" I had no answer. I hadn't thought about it that way before. I'd been so consumed by what I'd lost that I hadn't considered what I might still have, or what I might yet build. "The best revenge," Dr. Chen continued when I remained silent, "is not some elaborate scheme to hurt them back. It's creating a life so good they become irrelevant." Something stirred inside me at her words. Not hope exactly, not yet, but a tiny spark of defiance. A whisper that maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of my story after all. I didn't know then how right she would be. I didn't know that the path to my rebirth had already begun, or that one day I would return to face those who had laughed at my pain. All I knew was that for the first time since Derek said I can't do this at the altar, I felt something besides numbness and despair. I felt angry. And sometimes, anger is exactly what you need to start building yourself back up from the ashes. Dr. Chen became my lifeline over the next few weeks. Unlike my parents, who tiptoed around me as if I might break, she challenged me directly. She didn't pity me or treat me like a victim. Instead, she treated me like someone who had survived a trauma and was capable of healing. "What do you want, Amara?" she asked me during our third session, her voice calm but insistent. "Not what did you want with Derek? What do you want now, for yourself?" I stared at her blankly. "I don't know anymore." "That's your first task, then," she said, tapping her pen against her notepad. "Before our next session, I want you to make a list of things that are yours alone. Not things you wanted because of Derek or Vanessa or your parents, things that light you up inside." The assignment seemed impossible at first. I'd been Derek's girlfriend, then fiancé, for so long that I struggled to separate my desires from what I thought would make him happy. I'd put my own research aspirations on hold to support his startup dreams. I'd changed my hair, my clothes, even some of my opinions to better match what he wanted. Who was I without him? I started small. I liked spicy food, which Derek had always complained about. I enjoyed early mornings, while he preferred to sleep late. I loved documentaries about space, which had always bored him. Tiny preferences that had nothing to do with him began to form a sketch of a person I'd forgotten existed. When I brought my list to Dr. Chen, she nodded approvingly. "Good start. Now, what did you love doing before you met Derek? What dreams did you set aside?" That question led me back to my original passion, research in artificial intelligence. I'd been top of my class in computer science before meeting Derek. I'd had plans for graduate school, for developing algorithms that could help diagnose rare diseases. I'd put it all on the back burner when Derek's startup needed support. "Maybe I could go back to that," I said hesitantly. "Why not?" Dr. Chen challenged. "What's stopping you now?" The answer, of course, was nothing except my own fear and inertia. The realization was both terrifying and liberating. Each session peeled away another layer of the identity I'd built around Derek. Each week, I recovered more pieces of myself. The depression didn't magically disappear, but it began to retreat as I focused on rediscovering who I was and what I wanted. Then came the day that changed everything. I was leaving the pharmacy after picking up my prescription when I heard someone call my name. I turned to see Professor Winters, my undergraduate advisor and mentor. I hadn't seen her since graduation 4 years earlier. "Amara Miller," she said warmly, embracing me. "What a wonderful coincidence. How are you?" I gave her the sanitized version of my life, omitting the wedding disaster and suicide attempt. But something in my expression must have given me away. "Are you happy, Amara?" she asked gently. You were one of my most promising students. I always wondered why you didn't pursue graduate studies. Before I could stop myself, the whole story came pouring out. The wedding, the betrayal, the months of depression afterward. Professor Winters listened without interrupting, her kind eyes never leaving my face. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment before speaking. I'm so sorry that happened to you. But I have to say, I've been thinking about you recently for a completely different reason. She explained that she'd moved to Westlake University on the other side of the country and was leading a research team in AI applications for medical diagnostics, exactly the field I'd been passionate about. We just received a significant grant, and I'm building a team, she said. I need someone with your aptitude for algorithm design. The position includes funding for graduate studies if you're interested. I stared at her, convinced I was misunderstanding. You're offering me a job? After everything I just told you about my mental state? Professor Winters smiled. I'm offering you an opportunity. What you've been through doesn't define your capabilities. Sometimes the best way forward is a complete change of, scenery. Think about it at least. She pressed her card into my hand before walking away, leaving me standing there with the first real possibility of escape I'd had in months. That night, I sat in my childhood bedroom staring at her card. Moving across the country seemed extreme, terrifying. I'd never lived more than 20 miles from where I grew up. All my connections, however damaged, were here. My therapy with Dr. Chen was finally helping. Starting over completely was a risk. But staying meant continuing to live in the shadow of my humiliation. It meant running into Derek and Vanessa at the grocery store or coffee shop. It meant enduring the pitying glances and whispered comments. It meant living with my parents who, despite their best intentions, reminded me daily of my failure. I'm sorry. Next morning, I called Professor Winters and accepted her offer. Then I called Dr. Chen to tell her about my decision. I think it's exactly what you need, she said, surprising me with her immediate support. But this isn't running away, Amara. This is running towards something. Remember the difference. In the weeks that followed, I threw myself into preparations. I applied for the graduate program at Westlake. I researched apartments in my new city. I packed up the remnants of my old life, donating most of it to charity. Every task felt like shedding another piece of the person I'd been with Derek. My parents reacted with predictable concern. It's so far away, my mother fretted. What if something happens? What if something good happens? I countered, surprising myself with my conviction. I need this, Mom. I need to find out who I am without all of this hanging over me. My father, to my surprise, supported me more strongly. She needs a fresh start, he told my mother when she continued to object. Let her go find herself. The night before I left, Dr. Chen gave me a journal as a parting gift. Write down who you want to become, she instructed. Be specific. When you feel lost, read what you've written and ask yourself if your actions are aligned with that vision. That night, I wrote my first entry. I want to become someone so strong and successful that when I think of Derek and Vanessa, if I think of them at all, I feel nothing but indifference. The next morning, I boarded a plane with 2 suitcases and a fragile sense of possibility. As the aircraft lifted off, I watched my hometown shrink beneath me until it disappeared completely. Something loosened in my chest. For the first time since the wedding, I felt like I could breathe fully. I didn't know what awaited me in my new life. I didn't know the challenges I would face, or the person I would become. I only knew that with each mile that passed beneath the plane, I was moving away from the laughing faces at my wedding and toward something that was entirely my own. Professor Winters met me at the airport, her warm smile a beacon in an unfamiliar city. Welcome to your new beginning, she said as we drove toward campus. I have a feeling you're going to surprise yourself with what you're capable of. Looking at the unfamiliar skyline glittering in the distance, I allowed myself to consider that she might be right. This city knew nothing of my humiliation. Here I could be anyone I wanted to be. Here I could rebuild myself from the ground up. The thought was terrifying. It was also exhilarating. If I had known then how completely I would transform, how thoroughly I would reinvent myself, I might not have believed it. But standing at the threshold of my new life, I felt something I hadn't experienced in months. Hope. 18 months can change everything. When I look in the mirror now, I barely recognize the woman who fled her own wedding. My hair, once long because Derek preferred it that way, is now cut into a confident bob that frames my face. My body is stronger, toned from regular morning runs and evening yoga sessions. Even my style has evolved, sleek and professional with bold colors Derek would have called too much. But the physical changes are just the surface. The real transformation happened inside. The first few months at Westlake were brutal. Despite Professor Winter's faith in me, I struggled to catch up after years away from serious academic work. I spent nights in the lab, pushing through material that seemed impossibly complex. There were moments I nearly gave up, convinced I'd made a terrible mistake. "You're being too hard on yourself," Professor Winters told me after finding me crying in her office one evening. Everyone struggles at first. The difference is whether you let it stop you. I chose not to let it stop me. Each morning, I read the growing list in my journal of who I wanted to become. Each day, I pushed myself to live up to that vision. Slowly, the work became easier. My confidence grew with each challenge I overcame. By the 6-month mark, I'd found my rhythm. My research on predictive algorithms for early disease detection was showing promising results. I'd been accepted into the graduate program with a full scholarship. I'd even made friends, real ones who knew nothing about my past humiliation. There was Sarah, my lab partner, whose wicked sense of humor made even the longest research sessions bearable. There was Miguel, whose brilliant mind challenged me to think beyond conventional approaches. And there was Zoe, who lived in the apartment next to mine, and insisted I join her for Friday night dinners when she noticed I rarely left the lab. "All work and no play makes Amara boring," she'd say, dragging me to local restaurants or art exhibitions. Through her, I discovered parts of myself I'd never explored. I learned I loved jazz music and spicy Szechuan food and abstract art that made me feel something I couldn't quite name. For my birthday, 9 months after my arrival, my new friends threw me a surprise party. Standing in Zoe's apartment, surrounded by people who genuinely cared about me, I realized I'd built something I'd thought impossible that day in the church, a life that had nothing to do with Derek or Vanessa or my humiliation. That night, after everyone had gone home, I wrote in my journal, "I am becoming someone I'm proud to be." The professional successes came next. Professor Winters introduced me to Dr. Eleanor Reed, a renowned venture capitalist who specialized in medical technology. After hearing my presentation on our research, she invited me to coffee. "You have a unique perspective," she said, stirring her latte thoughtfully. "Most researchers focus solely on the technology. You understand the human element too." That coffee meeting turned into a mentorship that transformed my understanding of business and investment. Dr. Reed taught me to see beyond the lab, to recognize the commercial potential of our research. She introduced me to her network, powerful men and women who could turn ideas into funded realities. "Always know your worth," she advised me. "In research, in business, in life, never let anyone convince you that you're less valuable than you are." Under her guidance, I began to invest the modest savings I'd accumulated from my research stipend. Small amounts at first, in stable companies she recommended. Then, as my confidence grew, in more speculative ventures that aligned with my own research interests. To my surprise, I had a talent for recognizing promising technologies. My first significant return came when a small startup developing neural interfaces was acquired by a tech giant. The exhilaration of watching my investment triple in value awakened something new in me. Ambition. Not the supporting from the sidelines kind I'd practiced with Derek, but a fierce personal drive to succeed on my own terms. 1 year after my arrival at Westlake, I was invited to present our research at a major conference in San Francisco. My presentation earned a standing ovation and led to a flurry of interest from pharmaceutical companies eager to implement our algorithms. That night, celebrating with Professor Winters, I confessed how far I'd come from the broken woman who'd arrived in her office 18 months earlier. "You did the work," she said simply. "I just opened the door." It was during the flight home, From that conference that fate threw Derek back into my awareness. Browsing a technology magazine, I stumbled upon an article about promising startups. There was his company, DareTech, featured prominently. The photo showed Derek and his team, Vanessa at his side as Chief Operations Officer. My heart clenched, but not with the pain I expected. Instead, I felt something closer to academic interest as I read about their flagship product, a machine learning platform for predictive market analysis. The description sounded oddly familiar. I pulled out my laptop and opened my old research files, the ones I'd shared with Derek during late-night discussions about my graduate school dreams. The similarities were unmistakable. He'd taken my discarded ideas, my preliminary research, on predictive algorithms, and applied them to financial markets instead of medical diagnostics. He hadn't just stolen my heart and my dignity, he'd stolen my intellectual property too. A younger version of me might have crumbled at this discovery. The woman I'd become saw an opportunity. I spent the next 3 months diving deep into DareTech's technology, identifying critical flaws in their approach that my more recent research had already solved. Their algorithms worked for obvious market trends but would fail catastrophically with more complex data patterns. Armed with this knowledge, I approached Dr. Reed with a proposal: strategically invest in a competing technology that avoided these pitfalls. She listened carefully to my analysis before nodding. "It's a significant risk," she warned, "but the potential return is substantial. Are you sure you can be objective about this, given your history with the founder?" "Absolutely," I replied, surprised to find it was true. This wasn't about revenge. It was about recognizing a market inefficiency I was uniquely positioned to exploit. Dr. Reed helped me structure the investment through a holding company that masked my involvement. Together, we approached Neurotech, a promising competitor to DareTech with superior technology but limited market penetration. With Dr. Reed's backing and my technical insights, we secured a significant equity stake in exchange for helping them refine their product. Within 6 months, Neurotech's superior algorithms began attracting clients away from DareTech. I monitored their progress dispassionately, taking satisfaction not from Derek's setbacks but from the validation of my own technical judgment. By the time 18 months had passed since my wedding day, I was barely recognizable as the same person. I had a growing reputation in my field, a promising investment portfolio, genuine friendships, and a new sense of self that had nothing to do with being someone's partner. I had become what Dr. Chen had described in our therapy sessions: a woman whose life was so good, those who had hurt her were becoming irrelevant. Or at least, they would have been irrelevant if fate hadn't intervened once again. The call came on a Tuesday morning as I was preparing for a lab meeting. My mother's voice sounded thin and frightened over the phone. "It's cancer, Amara. Stage 3. The doctors say I need to start treatment right away." Just like that, the life I'd carefully built across the country was colliding with the one I'd left behind. Just like that, I was being pulled back to the town where I'd been humiliated, to face the people who had laughed as my life fell apart. Only this time, I wouldn't be returning as the broken, humiliated bride. I would be returning as the woman I had become. And that woman was ready to show them exactly who she was now. I arranged a leave of absence from Westlake the same day my mother called. Professor Winters was immediately supportive, assuring me my position would be waiting when I returned. Dr. Reed helped me set up remote access to continue monitoring our investments. Within 48 hours, I was on a plane heading back to the place I'd sworn never to return. The town looked exactly the same, as if it had been frozen in time while I'd been transforming. The same coffee shops, the same town square, the same judgmental glances from people who recognized me. Only now, their double takes held confusion alongside the pity. I wasn't the same shell-shocked woman who'd left 18 months ago. My father met me at the airport, his face lined with new worry. "You look different," he said as we drove home. "More like yourself somehow." I wasn't sure what he meant until I realized he was seeing glimpses of the confident girl I'd been before Derek, combined with the woman I'd become since. "I am myself now," I replied simply. My mother's condition was worse than she'd admitted over the phone. The cancer had spread aggressively, and her treatment would be intense. I settled into a routine of driving her to appointments, managing her medications, and trying to keep the household running while my father worked. During the rare quiet moments, I continued my research remotely and checked in with my investments. Neurotech was gaining market share steadily, their latest quarterly report showing a significant increase in revenue. I took private satisfaction in their success, knowing it came partially at Neurotech's expense. It was during one of my mother's treatment sessions that I first learned about the gala. The oncology nurse making small talk mentioned the upcoming tech event. "The whole town's talking about it," she said, adjusting my mother's IV. "That local startup Neurotech is launching their big new product. They're hosting this fancy gala at the Metropolitan Hotel. My husband's cousin works security there and says they've invited every investor and tech journalist in the state." My mother, weak from chemotherapy, glanced at me with concern, but I kept my expression neutral. "Sounds interesting," I said casually. That night, I researched the event. The Neurotech product launch gala was indeed going to be the biggest tech event our small city had ever seen. Derek had apparently leveraged his charming personality and my research to build significant buzz around his company. The gala would showcase their flagship platform's new features and cement relationships with major investors. The guest list was carefully curated. Tech executives, venture capitalists, local business leaders, and select media would attend. And because Derek had always had a flair for the dramatic, he'd also invited his entire wedding party. The people who had stood by laughing while he humiliated me. I stared at my laptop screen for a long time, conflicting emotions washing over me. Part of me wanted to ignore the event completely, to focus solely on my mother's care, and then return to my new life. That would be the mature choice, the healthy choice. But another part of me, the part that had been rebuilding herself meticulously for 18 months, saw an opportunity. Not for petty revenge, but for something more profound. A chance to close the chapter completely, on my terms. Dr. Chen had taught me to examine my motivations carefully. I spent the night journaling, analyzing what I truly wanted. By morning, I had my answer. This wasn't about hurting Derek or Vanessa. It was about reclaiming the narrative of my life, about standing tall in front of those who had laughed at my pain. I called Dr. Reed the next day. "I need a favor," I explained after outlining the situation. "I need an invitation to this gala." She was silent for a moment. "Are you sure this is wise, Amara? You've built something valuable. Is it worth risking your peace of mind?" "I'm not going to create a scene," I assured her, "but I need to do this to truly move forward." To my surprise, she laughed. "Well, as it happens, I was already invited. The Reed Foundation is always on these guest lists. I'll have them add you as my associate. But Amara, remember what we've discussed about knowing your worth. Don't give them the power to define you again." With the invitation secured, I faced my next challenge, preparing myself mentally and physically for the confrontation. I spent the next 2 weeks balancing my mother's care with strategic planning. I researched Neurotech's recent performance, identifying vulnerabilities in their market position. I reviewed my own notes on the flaws in their algorithms. I wanted to be armed with knowledge, not just emotion. The night of the gala arrived sooner than I expected. I dressed carefully in a sleek black dress that projected confidence and professionalism. My hair was styled in the sophisticated bob that had become my signature. Diamond studs, a gift from Dr. Reed after our first successful investment, glinted at my ears. Standing before the mirror, I barely recognized my reflection compared to the broken woman who had fled her wedding. "You're ready for this," I told myself, echoing Dr. Chen's affirmation technique. "You're not the same person they laughed at." The Metropolitan Hotel's grand ballroom had been transformed for the event. Blue and silver lights cast a futuristic glow over the space. Tech displays showcased Neurotech's products around the perimeter. At the center, a stage was set up for the evening's presentations. I entered alone, having declined Dr. Reed's offer to accompany me. This was a journey I needed to complete by myself. The doorman checked my invitation, his eyes widening slightly, as he recognized my name. News of my arrival would spread quickly. The room was already filled with people in expensive attire, drinking champagne and networking enthusiastically. I accepted a glass from a passing waiter and surveyed the crowd, recognizing several faces from my previous life. Former friends, Derek's colleagues, members of our wedding party. None of them noticed me immediately. giving me time to observe and plan my approach. I began by introducing myself to key investors, leveraging my connection to Dr. Reed and my own growing reputation in AI research. My time with Dr. Reed had taught me the language of venture capital, and I spoke it fluently now. Within an hour, I had engaged several major players in substantive conversations about the future of predictive analytics, carefully avoiding any mention of my connection to DearTech's founder. Your insights on neural network applications are fascinating, said Martin Chen, CEO of a major tech investment firm. Are you with one of the startups here tonight? I lead research at Westlake University, I replied smoothly. We're doing some interesting work on predictive algorithms for medical applications, but the principles could apply to financial markets as well. You should talk to Derek Weston, Martin suggested, gesturing across the room. His team is doing similar work. I could introduce you? I smiled. No need. We're already acquainted. At that moment, I felt a presence behind me. The conversation around us quieted. I turned slowly to find Derek staring at me, his face a mask of shock. He looked successful in his tailored suit, but there was a tightness around his eyes that hadn't been there before, a hint of strain beneath the confidence. Amara, he said, his voice carefully controlled. I had no idea you were back in town. Family emergency, I replied coolly. My mother is ill. I'm sorry to hear that, he said, sounding genuinely concerned. Then, recovering his composure, you look different. It's been 18 months, Derek. People change. Before he could respond, Vanessa appeared at his side, her hand possessively on his arm. She froze when she saw me, her carefully made-up face paling slightly. If Derek looked strained, Vanessa looked positively anxious, her eyes darting between us. Amara, she stammered. What a surprise. I smiled, extending my hand professionally. Vanessa, congratulations on your company's success. I've been following your progress with interest. The confusion on their faces was worth every second of preparation. They had expected tears, accusations, or awkward avoidance. They had expected the Amara they had humiliated. Instead, they were facing a poised, successful woman who seemed entirely unruffled by their presence. You've been following DearTech? Derek asked, suspicion creeping into his voice. Professional curiosity, I replied. Your predictive market analysis platform has some interesting features. The core algorithms look somewhat familiar, actually. His eyes narrowed slightly, recognizing the implication. Beside him, Vanessa shifted uncomfortably. We should prepare for the presentation, she said, tugging at his arm. It's starting in 20 minutes. Of course, I said pleasantly. I'm looking forward to it. As they walked away, I caught the whispers starting around me. Other guests had recognized the drama unfolding and were speculating wildly. I ignored them, maintaining my composure as I continued to circulate, introducing myself to other influential attendees. With each conversation, I planted small seeds of doubt about DearTech's technology, not obvious criticisms, but thoughtful questions about their approach to complex data patterns. Technical concerns that would resonate with the knowledgeable investors in the room. From across the room, I could feel Derek watching me, his expression growing increasingly concerned. He had expected me to be a footnote in his success story. Instead, I had returned as a potential threat, an unknown variable in his carefully orchestrated evening. As the presentation time approached, I positioned myself strategically near the front of the room, visible but not conspicuous. Around me, the crowd of influential investors and industry leaders settled in for the main event of the evening. The moment Derek took the stage, his eyes locked with mine briefly, and I saw something I'd never expected to see there. Fear. Derek's presentation began smoothly enough. He was always charismatic on stage, able to translate complex technical concepts into compelling business opportunities. The audience nodded appreciatively as he outlined DearTech's growth over the past year and teased the new features of their predictive market analysis platform. What makes our technology revolutionary, he explained, clicking to the next slide, is our proprietary algorithm's ability to identify market patterns that traditional analysis misses. Today, we're unveiling an enhanced version that promises even greater predictive accuracy. I watched with professional interest as he launched the live demonstration. On the large screen behind him, the DurTech platform processed a complex data set of market variables, generating predictions for various scenarios. For the uninitiated, it looked impressive. But I could see the flaws immediately. The demo progressed until Derek reached the critical stress test, the part where the system would analyze highly volatile market conditions. He initiated the simulation with confident flourish. As you can see, even under extreme conditions, our system maintains predictive stability and accuracy, he began, but his voice faltered as the visualization on screen began to show inconsistencies, the prediction confidence intervals widening erratically. Derek tapped at his tablet, trying to correct the issue while maintaining his smile. Just a small calibration issue, he assured the crowd, but I could see the panic in his eyes. The algorithm was encountering exactly the data pattern problems I had identified months ago and subsequently solved in my own research. From the corner of my eye, I saw Vanessa frantically signaling to their tech team. The chief engineer approached, the stage whispering urgently to Derek while attempting adjustments. The awkward silence in the room grew heavier with each passing second. Perhaps we should move to the next segment while we resolve this technical hiccup, Derek suggested, his composure slipping. A voice from the back called out, "Is this indicative of the system's reliability under real market conditions?" The question hung in the air, voicing the concern now visible on investors' faces. Derek fumbled for an answer, looking increasingly desperate. That's when I made my decision. I raised my hand. May I ask a technical question about the algorithm's approach to nonlinear volatility patterns? All eyes turned to me. Derek hesitated, clearly trapped. Refusing would look worse than accepting. Of course, he said tightly. Amara is a former colleague with expertise in algorithmic design. I stood, keeping my voice even and professional. The issue you're encountering appears to be a cascading error in how the algorithm processes multivariate correlations under stress conditions. It's trying to force linear relationships onto inherently nonlinear data. The room went completely silent. I continued. This is actually a common issue in predictive systems. We encountered similar challenges in our medical diagnostic research at Westlake, but developed a different approach to pattern recognition that avoids this particular problem. I wasn't being malicious. I was being factually accurate, speaking as one professional to another. But the impact was devastating. Investors exchanged glances. Technical experts in the audience nodded in understanding. Derek's face hardened. Thank you for the observation. Our team will certainly take that into consideration for future iterations. But it was too late. The demonstration had failed spectacularly, and my explanation had provided both the reason and an implicit comparison to better solutions. The damage was done. The remainder of Derek's presentation was rushed and tense. As soon as it concluded, investors swarmed around me instead of him, eager to hear more about the alternative approaches I'd mentioned. I answered their questions, honestly, without ever directly criticizing DurTech again. Are you associated with a competing platform? One venture capitalist asked bluntly. I'm primarily in academic research, I replied, but I do advise Neurotech on their algorithm development. The mention of Neurotech, DurTech's increasingly successful competitor, caused another ripple of interest. Business cards were pressed into my hand. Invitations to meetings were extended, all while Derek and Vanessa watched from across the room, their perfect evening disintegrating around them. Eventually, Derek approached me again, this time without Vanessa. His charming facade had completely fallen away, replaced by barely controlled anger. "What are you doing, Amara?" he hissed. "Is this your idea of revenge? Sabotaging years of our work?" I regarded him calmly. "I didn't sabotage anything, Derek. Your algorithm failed because it's fundamentally flawed when handling complex data patterns. That's not my opinion. It's mathematical fact. This is about the wedding, isn't it? You've spent all this time plotting to humiliate me like you think I humiliated you." I shook my head, feeling a strange sense of peace wash over me. "No, Derek. This isn't about the wedding. This isn't even about you. I came here tonight to face my past and move beyond it. The technical issues with your platform existed whether I pointed them out or not. You expect me to believe this is coincidence? You show up out of nowhere after disappearing for over a year, and suddenly my investors are flocking to you? They're interested in solid technology, not drama, I said. But since you brought it up, I do have a question I've wanted to ask. Those algorithms you're using, they look remarkably similar to my early research. The work I shared with you when we were together. When you were encouraging me to put aside my impractical academic interests to support your dreams. He paled slightly, confirming my suspicions. That's ridiculous. Our team developed everything from scratch. Did they? Or did you give them my notes as a starting point? Because the flaws in your system are exactly the flaws I identified and solved in my more recent work. I stepped closer, lowering my voice. I'm not here to expose you, Derek. I don't need to. Your system's limitations will become increasingly apparent to your investors with or without my help. Before he could respond, Vanessa appeared at his side, her eyes darting nervously between us. The Mendelssohn Group is looking for you, she told him urgently. They have concerns about the platform's stability. Derek glared at me once more before allowing Vanessa to lead him away. I watched them go, struck by how diminished they suddenly seemed. Not because of anything I'd done specifically, but because I no longer saw them through the lens of my own insecurity and pain. Throughout the remainder of the evening, I observed as more investors drifted away from Derek and his team. The technical failure had shaken their confidence, and my presence had provided an all-too-convenient alternative focus. By the time I prepared to leave, DareTech's big night had transformed from a triumph into a potential disaster. As I collected my coat, I overheard one of Derek's former groomsmen speaking to another guest. That's her, he whispered not so subtly. The one who got left at the altar. Can you believe she had the nerve to show up and then basically tank his demonstration? His companion squinted at me. Wait, that's the same woman? She looks completely different, and she just obliterated him with that technical analysis. I guess she's not laughing now, the first man muttered. I approached them directly, enjoying their uncomfortable expressions as they realized I'd heard everything. Actually, I haven't felt this good in a long time, I said pleasantly. Enjoy the rest of your evening, gentlemen. The following morning, I made one final move. Using a portion of my investment earnings, I made a substantial donation to a mental health foundation specifically focused on helping people rebuild after personal trauma. I dedicated the donation in Derek and Vanessa's names with a public acknowledgement thanking them for showing me who I really am. The story made the local news and spread quickly through business circles. The irony was lost on no one. The same people who had laughed at my humiliation now watched as Derek and Vanessa's reputation collapsed. Not because I had set out to destroy them, but because their success had been built on shaky foundations, both technical and ethical. 6 months later, I stood in my office at Westlake, looking out over the campus. My mother's treatment had been successful, and after ensuring she was in remission, I had returned to my research and teaching. The work continued to thrive, with new grants and recognition coming regularly. Neurotech, with my advisory input, had secured major clients and funding while DareTech struggled to recover from their disastrous launch. Derek and Vanessa had reportedly split up under the strain, their perfect power couple image shattered as investors abandoned them. Last I heard, they were both working entry-level positions at separate firms, their entrepreneurial dreams on indefinite hold. A knock at my door interrupted my thoughts. My assistant announced that my lunch date had arrived. I smiled as James entered, his warm eyes crinkling at the corners. We had met during a cross-departmental research project 2 months after my return from my hometown. His brilliance matched his kindness, and our relationship had developed naturally, built on mutual respect and genuine connection. Ready to go? He asked, taking my hand. As we walked across campus, he asked about my upcoming trip back to my hometown for my father's retirement party. Are you nervous about seeing those people again? He asked, knowing enough of my history to understand the complexity. I considered the question carefully. No, I said truthfully. That chapter is closed for me now. And it was. The final proof came later that week when I literally bumped into Derek at a conference both our institutions had sent representatives to. He looked startled, then quickly composed himself into a shadow of his former charm. "Amara," he said, attempting casualness. "You look well." "Thank you," I replied simply. "Listen," he continued, glancing around to ensure we weren't overheard. "I've been meaning to reach out. What happened between us at the wedding, it was unforgivable. I can see now how successful you've become, how brilliant you always were. We could have been incredible together, professionally and personally. Maybe someday we could talk about collaborating again." I studied him, noting the desperation poorly concealed behind his smile, the hint of calculation in his eyes. Once, those eyes had been my whole world. Once his approval had been everything I sought. Now I felt nothing but a mild curiosity, like observing a specimen from a long-ago expedition. "I don't think so, Derek," I said gently. "But I wish you well." I walked away without looking back, feeling the final weight of my past lift completely. They had laughed when he humiliated me at our wedding. They certainly weren't laughing now. But more importantly, I had found something far beyond revenge or validation. I had found myself, the woman I was always meant to be, strong, capable, complete on her own terms. In the end, that was the most satisfying victory of all.